of something is. So I'm going to run through some stuff that some of you may find like, hey, this is really basic, but once you see like the pathway, you'll realize, okay, this is important to see these steps, because I've worked with people that have been like published songwriters, like huge hits for 30 years, 40 years. And I mentioned like a co-publishing deal and they're like, oh, no one's ever really explained that to me. And I'm like, how have you made it 35 years and you don't know what a publishing deal, like a co-publishing deal is, like truly is? So I say that because it's important to me to like lay groundwork first. So I'm going to jump right into it. We're talking about collection agencies, specifically starting at least with the PROs, because most of the time you're going to have an idea, but not a full concept, and not just what they are, but how you leverage them for your benefit, right? And so that's a piece of what I want to accomplish today. So it starts with going backwards a little bit and making sure you understand why the PROs exist and what they're meant to accomplish. Because when you understand that, then you can sort of leverage their position in your world, right? So understanding why they exist starts with going back to copyright law. Copyright law, when you write a song, and I know I'm probably dealing, well, for the ones that I can see, like, are all of you songwriters or composers in some part or not? Pretty much. It looks like pretty much everyone nodded or gave some acknowledgement. So when you create, this could be a musical composition, a recording, but also artwork, photography, videos, whatever, you are vested with a copyright. And that copyright comes with a limited monopoly. The limited monopoly is you get certain rights that are exclusive to you so that you can prevent the rest of the world from exercising them, right? So when you write a song and you write the lyrics and melody, for example, you can say, well, hey, I can duplicate this and somebody else can't without my consent. I can translate this and somebody else can't without my consent. So I want to point out the 6 rights so that you know what they are, because the PROs operate under one of those rights. And that's important just from a logical flow standpoint too. So when you're a copyright owner, you write a song, you have the right to duplicate or make copies of that song. That's an exclusive right to you. No one else can do that unless they have your consent, or there's an exception in law. That's a little bit of a topic for another day, but we'll start with just no one else can exercise these rights without your consent, without some exception in law. All right. The second thing is you get the first crack at distributing your music to the public. Now, once you do, there's other provisions in copyright law that will allow somebody else to use your song, which you may have been surprised to learn, without your consent, but you do have the initial right to distribute it to the public. That's exclusive to you. No one can take that from you. The third one is you have the right to make derivative works. Generally speaking, we think of like translations, we think of like adaptations, or a song, like a variation of a song that's not the same, but it's sort of substantially similar. I don't know what the best legal terminology to explain a derivative work is, other than you're probably already familiar with them in practice, right? You're probably creating derivative works on some level. So you kind of understand you have that exclusive right to create a derivative work. Now we can go off on a million threads on that. Well, what about mashups? What about everybody, what they're doing on social media today? It looks like derivative works. Another topic for another day. Just understand derivative works are one of your exclusive rights as a copyright owner, okay? The next one is to publicly display your work. Now with the song, that might be literally displaying the lyrics with artwork, like a sculpture or photography or something like that. That would be like putting it up on the wall or putting it in public. So, but this is public display. So private display, I can display your lyrics. Any of you here, I could put your lyrics on my wall at home, and there's nothing you could do because it's not a public display, right? So public is what matters when it comes to display. I'm going to skip the one that's most important to PROs because we'll end with that so we could transition to PROs. But the next one is the digital transmission of sound recordings. Historically, there was no copyright to protect transmission of sound recordings. And we can go back in history, and that's part of why, if you're familiar with like terrestrial radio, why you're wondering, wait, why do songwriters get paid and not artists? Or there's certain venues and formats where you're like, why do they get paid but not them? Artist side or producer side versus songwriter side, or composer side. And this right in particular was meant to address the fact that sound recordings didn't have protection under copyright law in the analog world, basically. And so now there's a digital transmission of sound recordings right that's built into copyright law. So as a side note, that also gives you an extra stream of revenue that you didn't have before. This final one, that's these bundle of copyrights, is the right to publicly perform your music. So that's where we're going to transition to PROs, but understanding this is the backdrop for why PROs even exist and where they live. They live in that right to publicly perform your songs. Okay. So transition now. You understand these rights, you have your songs, and you're saying, well, look, who's responsible for this? Well, it's real easy if you have a publishing deal, because you don't have to worry about it, right? You sign your deal, your publisher or your administrator takes over, right? They're responsible for exercising those rights. And when you work with a publisher, their job is to look at all of those 6 bundled rights and say, we can take care of all of these. We can, do this kind of license or track this kind of income, or we can, double down over here, invest in there and generate income and then account for it. But when you're a self-published writer, what are your options, right? Because it's all on you. And my guess is, just sort of based on like who's here and the environment that we're in, a lot of you are responsible for these activities, right? Is it okay if a show of hands, like how many are responsible for your own publishing activities, right? I'm guessing everybody. So when you don't have a publisher that you're signed to, you have to understand the business beyond just making music. And that's a frustrating part for artists and creators, is because you didn't go into this thinking you have to be a marketer. You didn't go into this thinking you had to be a social media expert. You didn't go into this thinking you had to be a CPA, right? And yet everyone's telling you, look, if you want to be successful, these are the skills you need to have. And you're like, I just love to compose music. Like, when did I have to use like an abacus to do my royalties and all this? So when you know you're responsible for it, now you have to own, and this isn't me like putting this on you, this is me just enabling you to say, you have to own, if you're going to extract the maximum amount of revenue from your creative properties, it's on you to understand where those properties can travel and who's working within those properties to create revenue, create opportunities, and then to extract it, and for you to capture it. Because I'll tell you, this is sort of a side note, like out there, that when PROs, for example, and they're just one example, but when they capture revenue and it's not tied to a person, and let me guarantee to you that they do capture revenue that's not necessarily connected to a person, it just goes in a bucket, right? And when that bucket is unclaimed after a certain period of time, that gets divvied out. Now, they won't tell you this publicly, and it's probably, I don't know that you would find this anywhere publicly, but that bucket, how do you think it gets distributed? By the big dog. It gets distributed to the big dogs, the ones that have hits, the ones that are charting. So if the charts are going like this and the highest ones are up here and the songs that are getting the most play are up here, when that bucket is unclaimed for a certain period of time, which could be money from all of these writers out here. Sorry, I'm trying to work within my little window here. This long line of writers that aren't making the tens of millions of hundreds of millions of dollars for song income, when that bucket is unclaimed, it just gets dumped into the bucket to the people that already have money. Because guess what? They are on top of it. Granted, they're on top of it through their publishers and their administrators and all of that, but it's their ecosystem to extract from you, right? So your job is to take that back. It's your money. So we're here to empower that. So understand that as a self-published writer, it's your job to understand the publishing business. We're focusing today on PROs, and we're going to get into that because I know there's some specific questions about that. So I want to run through those, but I also want to leave ample time to where, because I know this could go 1,000 ways and you have a lot of questions, of course. So what does a PRO do? Let's talk about, they deal only with musical compositions. So my guess is your creators, you understand the difference between a musical composition and a sound recording or a master. Not everybody does. Not every creator understands those are two distinct pieces of property, right? So maybe a visual analogy would be like the water bottle and the water that's in it, right? The water that's in it might be your musical composition. The bottle might be just the master, the track that it's captured on, right? But you can have, now this is where the no analogy really works for music, because if you have 10 bottles that are owned by 10 different people, you keep pouring the water, and it just keeps getting replenished. You keep pouring it in. So now every single water bottle has the same amount of water. That water is the musical composition, but it's a new bottle, right? For a different person. So understanding performing rights organizations are only dealing with that water, that musical composition. So if you're a producer or you're not a songwriter, basically, performing rights organizations don't have anything to do with you. And this is one thing that I've learned over time. You can't ever assume that everyone knows that. So I'm not trying to like dumb it down. I'm just saying we got to be clear who we're talking about. Performing arts organizations only deal with musical compositions. Because of that, they only deal with writers, composers, and publishers. And to some extent, because of the nature of the business, administrators. They don't deal with artists. They don't deal with producers. They don't deal with record labels. By and large, they're not designed to. So the next thing is they only deal with performance related income. So go back to when we talked about like the copyrights and the bundle of rights. Performances is only one on that list of 6. So PROs don't deal with derivative works. They don't deal with displays. They don't deal with digital transmission of sound recordings because the definition, it answers the question. It's a sound recording, not a musical composition. So of those 6 rights, PROs are only working within the space of performances. And the last piece is it's public performances. So quick caveat just for explanation purposes is that if I'm in my home and I have a party over here and invite my friends and I play music, it's not a public performance under law, right? So I can play any song I want written by anyone in all of history, regardless of public domain or not, regardless of whether it's top of the charts or bottom of the charts, doesn't matter. In part because it's a private performance. And if you look at the list, you'll notice private performance isn't in that list of copyrights that you, the copyright owner, have. That's why it's a limited monopoly. It's not a full monopoly. So I can't, as a songwriter, I can't stop somebody from a private performance. But once it becomes public, which is usually defined as in a public venue, like a coffee shop, like a concert hall, like a train station, or it's open to the public, then it becomes a public performance. Now, guess what? The PROs are all involved in that, right? Or they're supposed to be. So that's one piece of understanding it. The other piece of understanding that PROs are dealing with, just real quick, because sometimes I know I could get going, by an up or down, is this pace okay for everybody? Good, okay. The other thing to understand is, okay, if PROs are dealing with public performances of musical compositions only, that's awesome. They're our go-between between us and the use, right? But you got to ask yourself, the use, how is that happening? So go back to Starbucks playing music over the loudspeaker, and you're like, wait, how does Starbucks do that? How does McDonald's or Nike, like the sneaker store or whatever, like how are they playing music over the speakers? Well, it's a public performance, right? By definition, it's open to the public, it's a public space. Well, that store should have or would have got a license from ASCAP, BMI, and or CSAC to be able to perform songs. Now, we all know here that there's a chance that that store didn't get a license, right? So guess what? If that store didn't get a license, your music's being used and exploited. It helps bring people into the business, helps them buy shoes because they heard your track and they're like, I want these Pumas now or whatever, because so-and-so, sang about Pumas on their track. So it's generating the store money, but the store doesn't have a PRO license, a venue license, which means the store is not reporting the use of your song, which means you're not getting money for the use of that song. So when you understand the ecosystem, you can understand how important it is, not just to understand that the PRO is in between you and the actual performance, but how important it is for the performance to be properly licensed in order to pay the PRO properly, right? And report to PRO properly. So when you understand that, you just understand the ecosystem. You start to look at the world differently, right? You go to the mall, you go to a restaurant, and you hear music, and you're like, is there a license? Well, back in the day, they would put a sticker, like you see an ASCAP sticker on the front door. A lot of places you'll still see that, ironically, but you might see a little ASCAP sticker on the front door. Look for that. It'll change your worldview of who has a license and who doesn't, right? So when you go into a bar, you hear all this music, and sometimes it's live and it's like a cover band, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. I love this cover band. And if you're one of those artists, because you're a singer-songwriter or you're an artist and a songwriter, and you're going to do a show or a gig at a bar, or coffee shop or whatever, and they're not paying, because one of the people on here is like, hey, I played and they didn't pay me. And that's, I understand that. But if they're also, they don't have a license with the PRO, then they're also using music, like they're relying on the whole music ecosystem and economy to extract value from you without paying. And this is a part of the problem the indie community faces, is that they're not thinking, we by and large aren't thinking about, wait, why doesn't that bar have a license, right? So when you understand the ecosystem, you can start to understand, when I go into a bar and I hear music, I want to know if they have a license. And most of the time they don't. Quick side note, you as a songwriter can always issue a license to them directly. So this is a quick power play practice note for you. If you go into a bar or you get a gig somewhere at a 4th of July party at the park or whatever that's sponsored by the city, one of the questions you could be asking is, do you guys have a PRO license for the song? And what's funny is many times they'll ask you if you have it, and they'll say, do you have consent to use the songs? You're not a venue, you're a performer. They are the venue, or at least they're controlling the venue. So you could kind of put that back on them and say, hey guys, I'm happy to play. That's a great fee or whatever, but it would be really important for you guys to have this properly licensed. Now that may blow your deal. So don't get me wrong, because they may say that's not in the budget, we don't want to, or next artist, because they got a line. But the point is, you could always ask that, because without them having a license, that concert in the park is the same problem. They're exploiting you and your music and the music economy without paying into it, right? So back on track. When you understand how the money starts to flow and how the rights start to flow, you'll get a quick sense of, let's go back real quick to when we had physical products, CDs, vinyl, cassette, right? And 8-track, whatever, all in history, physical product. That was a mechanical duplication, which is why you've heard mechanical royalty. Sometimes people say compulsory royalty, but mechanical royalty is that duplication on a physical product. Until Napster, and then fast forwarding through all the digital iterations, but what's Apple's iTunes, you have downloads. The law instantly realized, and the law is like this big bad wolf out there, the law realized, wait, we don't have a term for a download. It's kind of like a mechanical duplication on a CD, so let's call it that. It's a mechanical royalty. So when we started having downloads, the way that the law addressed it was just to say, and really the industry said, we don't have another way to approach this. Let's just use a download as it invokes a mechanical license. That's the right to duplicate. That's not a performance right. So if you're talking about the PROs didn't have anything to do with the download. Then we fast forward and we got into streaming, right? And streaming, when we got into streaming, which wasn't that that long after, the law again was like, holy cow, like how do we reconcile? It's not even really a duplication anymore. What is it? And the industry, you have songwriters, you have all these different lobbying groups are saying, we don't know what it is, but we do know somebody needs to get paid, right? So with streaming, the idea kind of circulated that streaming should be a component of a mechanical royalty and a component of performance royalty. But to make it worse and more complicated, the law and the lobbying groups and all of the trade groups kind of put their heads together and realize, wait, when it's a interactive service like a Spotify or an Apple Music, that's not the same as a non-interactive service like Pandora or something where you just click your first song and then you have no control over what plays after that. So, and I'm telling you this because when it comes to streaming, we can't assume that that's performance or mechanical or both or neither. We have to understand, is it an interactive service? Is it a non-interactive service? So I'll tell you kind of where things landed and where they currently are is if it's an interactive service, which Spotify and Apple Music and those tend to be the largest sort of suppliers in the space, is that it's an interactive service. Therefore, there's a mechanical component and a performance component. And guess what? Who do you think collects on that performance component of streaming? That's your PROs. So again, understanding the ecosystem, you're like, awesome. Okay, well then I know ASCAP, CSAC, BMI are in with Spotify and Apple Music, so we're good, right? And then my next question to you is, but are you signed up? And is your catalog updated? And are you registered as a writer and or a publisher? And so we're going to get into that in a second. But my point is now understanding, oh, okay, so it's not just about that the loop is closed in terms of like a consumer listens to a song through Spotify, and we know that there's a mechanical and it's paid over here, and then the performance piece is paid to the PROs. Guess what? ASCAP, CSAC, and BMI cannot collect for a song that they don't control in their repertoire. And they don't control it in a repertoire unless you are one of their writers and you've listed that song as a piece of your repertoire. So the money is sitting there. Now it's not necessarily even sitting in the PRO bucket. It's at the aggregator or the distributor bucket or the DSP bucket, which means it's going to sit there until no one claims it and it gets paid out. And who do you think it gets paid out? Well, at that level, it's probably getting paid out to the owners of the DSP, right? Or somebody else, but it's certainly not you. And that's the point. So going through the ecosystem, now we kind of understand the flow of the ecosystem. Let's jump to who are the PROs? What's the difference between the three, right? And why would you select one over the other? By a thumbs up or, well, I don't know if that'll work. How many are ASCAP? 2, 3, 2 that I could see. BMI, anyone I could see that's BMI? So at least one. Anybody CSAC? I'm curious, maybe if you could drop in the chat if you're CSAC, because I don't see, I have a limited view on mine. So I'm going to jump through these ASCAP and BMI first. And just so I see somebody SoCan because they're from Canada, that's great. So we can give some corollaries for the international piece. So in the United States, if you're a songwriter, I'm just telling you, you need to register with PRO. Why? Because if you weren't listening to this point, then I'm going to have to restate it, but you already know you're not going to collect anything from public performances of your music if you're not first registered with a PRO to do that. So you're already missing out on income. So if anyone ever says, why do I even need to do that? Just play them this video. I mean, you can't collect money that you're not registered for, okay? The next question is going to be, well, if it's 4 cents, why do I care? Well, what if the hit goes viral? Because if you come in late to the game, if you register late and bring your catalog in late to the game, it's entirely possible you're going to miss the window on collection. Or worse yet, it's going to get reallocated to somebody else's song because of the same name or some other misinformation. So my point is, get in as soon as you finish the song, get in there, start registering it. The PROs, let's talk about ASCAP and BMI first. So ASCAP, but let's start with BMI because it's the largest in terms of the number of songwriters and the number of songs it has. And it's something like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 14 million, I think. I might have the numbers off, but it's really large. And then ASCAP is just a few million less than that. So ASCAP is also really large. By comparison, it would be, CSAC would be like living in a two-story house underneath like the skyscrapers in New York, right? That's the size of CSAC. So going back to ASCAP and BMI, these are monopolies that are granted monopoly status by the government. So they can actually I don't want to say they could fix prices and stuff, but they can sort of act as monopolies and in some ways squash out their competition, which is why for many years, most of our music history, we've only seen a couple of PROs. So ASCAP is, I'm going to give you some specifics that I did write down. It's a $50 sign-up fee for a writer. It's a $50 sign-up fee, I believe, as a publisher as well. They're one-year contracts. They have global affiliates. And their perks would be things like you get free or reduced rate education. You get some like retreats. They'll set up songwriter retreats and activities like that. You'll get discounts on like car rentals and flights and hotels and stuff like that. But generally speaking, that's ASCAP, and their job is once you sign with ASCAP, their job is to now collect on the money that relates to your song and do a good job at it. BMI serves the same function, but like I said, they have more writers and more songs. If you read if you read a lot, and I read a lot, you'll see, oh, BMI actually does a better job of collections. You could find just as many people from ASCAP that'll say they do a great job. So that one to me is a 50-50 on who's faster or who's better. They count on the same cycles. So like quarterly, and I forget if it's 45 or 60 days within the end of the quarter. But you're probably not going to see a difference there. And as an individual writer, you're not really going to see a contrast unless you were with ASCAP and then switch to BMI or vice versa. However, where you will see a difference is price. BMI writers accounts are free. BMI publisher accounts are 150 bucks. I've heard and seen so many writers that say, well, BMI is the no-brainer because ASCAP's 50 bucks, it's free with BMI. Well, guess what? If you don't register as a publisher, where do you think the publishing money associated with your song goes? Because you understand the construct that if the song is like a pie and it's cut in half, and half of that is the songwriter's share, that other share is the publisher's share. Where does that go? That's going into a pot. And if you don't claim that pot gets claimed by somebody else. So when you don't register as a publisher, when you're self-published, you're literally missing out on half of your income for your songs. So when you balance it, if you registered as a writer and a publisher with BMI, that's 150 bucks. If you register as a writer and a publisher with ASCAP, I think that's 100 bucks. So economically, it actually is smarter to go with ASCAP. The other piece is that ASCAP contracts are 1 year automatic renewals each year. BMIs, I think, are 2 years for a writer and 5 years as a publisher. So if you sign up with BMI tomorrow as a songwriter, and then a week later, you're like, oh, shoot, I forgot to register as a publisher. You've now just signed a 5-year contract with BMI. Now, that's not the same as signing a record deal, but you're locked in with BMI for 5 years. So when your writer contract expires, here's the problem. You're on a 2-year cycle. And honestly, because the music industry is filled with a lot of people you can't trust. There's a part of me that wonders if they put it at an even number for writers and an odd number for publishers, because you're at 2, which is the first 2, and then you're at another 2, which is now at year 4. What do you do when you have 1 more year as a publisher, but you're expired as a writer? You're going to sign again as a writer, which puts you another 2. But now you're 1 year into the publishing term, or else you don't have a publisher account. So it kind of puts you at this, like, I guess I got to stay with BMI, right? Or you basically use a year of income on one side of the equation so that you could jump ship to ASCAP. So for me, I will, in all honesty, and I don't get paid, I'm not endorsing or sponsoring anything. I'm just saying, if it was me, and by the way, it is me, I signed with ASCAP. And most writers that I work with, that I represent, when they're like, I don't know, tell me. I'm like, go with ASCAP. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, because I know a lot of BMI writers and they're very, very happy with being a BMI writer. So some of it's personal. Let's switch gears to, and by the way, so I've talked about the fees and the contracts, and they're a little bit larger than ASCAP, but the global affiliates internationally, I've heard that they have better, stronger, further reach internationally. That's really tough for me to believe, because at some level, it also becomes about doing business in certain countries of the world. It doesn't matter who you're associated with. The guy that owns the company that's generating the income is driving around in a solid gold Cadillac, like literally plated with gold with your money. I can tell you dozens of stories of that, where they're supposed to be paying a PRO affiliate, a US PRO affiliate, and instead they're rolling around in like a $500,000 car. It is what it is. So to me, the international piece, unless you're a superstar, even gets to be less of a material reason for your decision. CSAC. CSAC is for profit. CSAC is membership only. CSAC it's a much smaller roster. I think it has like, I don't know, 20, 30,000 writers. And it's invitation only, but you can request an invitation. So that's also kind of weird. And then I think they're on 3-year contracts. So I do have clients and I have friends that are CSAC writers. And the hard part for me is nobody really complains about a PRO. They just like, whatever. Well, part of that whatever is because they don't really know the difference with or without one, right? So when you're armed with information, you're able to go in and join a PRO and say, now I know what the ecosystem looks like. And now you can start to ask the right questions. Because if you're gigging at the same places regularly, you can start to say, hey, I'm an ASCAP writer. It's important to me that you have an ASCAP license. So if you're an ASCAP writer, you could care less if they have a BMI license, but you want to make sure that venue has an ASCAP license. But the hard part is when you are an ASCAP writer and your co-writer is a BMI writer, and you're having that conversation, but you know you're going to get paid, but your co-writer's not, because the venue doesn't have a BMI license. So you can see where this could go. There's another one that I'll mention. There's actually 2 more that I'm aware of in the United States. One is called AMRA. and it is digital only. Digital. So basically, they will only collect from streaming, and I think they only from streaming really. There's probably other revenue sources that they'll deal with, but it's no like live performance kind of stuff. And so if you know that your songs are going to be in live venues, you would be missing out on income, even if it's small, if you went with AMRA, simply because they don't collect on it. And they're also a part of a bigger system where they're working with like Cobalt and other groups where it's really built around the digital future and bypassing the kind of live and in-person piece. So if you're not making any money there, you may not care. So AMRA is worth looking at. I can tell you, I am a writer, just not like you guys at the same level, but I'm a writer. I wouldn't go with AMRA simply because I want to know that I have the best possibility of extracting revenue. And I do hope for live performances of my music, right? The other one is GMR, I think, and it's ran by, or at least was started by Irving Azoff, who I think was a lawyer, and he headed up, gosh, some of my music history is way off, but one of the big labels. He's a brilliant dude, but it's kind of his thing. And so in my mind, I look at it as more of like a CSAC, low level. They don't have the infrastructure that ASCAP and BMI do. So to me, when you're weighing the PROs, a big piece of it is who has the best and biggest infrastructure to expand the broadest reach to potentially grab as many pennies as possible. Because until you're a chart maker, CSAC, AMRA, like none of those are really going to do anything for you. And plus you'll get discounts. And I'm not joking, like you'll get discounts on like car rentals or flights with ASCAP and BMI, which makes them more economically sensible, right? So which is right for you? At the end of the day, you got to kind of know what you're looking for and why, but I think I kind of answered even that question as I'm talking, and just being mindful of time and allowing for questions. Let me finish with one more thing. When part of the topic here was and other collection agencies, because it's important for me that if you didn't know what I've talked about today and you're just like, hey, I'm an ASCAP writer and I know it's about songs and that's kind of the extent of it, you're missing out on, like, you're leaving money on the table. It doesn't mean that once you register everything and you got writer account, publisher account, all your songs are updated in the system, that there will be money. It just means if there is, you're definitely going to have access to it where you wouldn't otherwise. The others that you need to be aware of are the Harry Fox Agency. And I know for people that haven't heard it, they're like, what the heck, Harry Fox? Harry Fox deals in the mechanical side of licensing. And so typically it would be like blanket licensing on your behalf. So almost like acting like an administrator, but only for the mechanical rights. So you can register with Harry Fox Agency to act as your administrator for mechanical purposes, and then register with your PRO to act for the public performance piece. So now you're starting to close out the loop on those. Remember, we talked about those different rights a copyright owner has. Sound exchange, I only want two more things. Sound exchange is for the digital transmission of sound recordings. So sound exchange only works in the digital world and when it relates to the sound recording. So it doesn't collect on the musical composition side, only on the master or the track side. So if you're also an artist and you also own your tracks, or you're performing on tracks that you don't own, you definitely want to be at least be up to speed on what sound exchange is, because let's say that each of you at some point in 2023 gets invited to guest appear on a track that really does do well, make some money. If they didn't, and this is just another practice note for you, you want to be listed as a co-feature on that track, because then there's a piece of sound exchange money that could go to you, because the performer gets paid by sound exchange. The copyright owner gets paid by sound exchange. But if there's a co-performer or featured performer, you can get a piece of that action from the main featured artist, but only if they break off that piece in your deal with them. So when you collaborate on another project and you know they're set up, like maybe they're signed to a label or whatever, you need to make sure that you say, hey, I want to make sure I'm getting my portion of sound exchange monies as a co-feature / co-performer. And it'll usually involve a letter of direction and other language in your contract. But just to ask the questions will kind of put it on the radar. Last piece is international, because somebody already said they're in SOCAN, or they're in Canada, so they're a member of SOCAN. There might be people from other countries that are members of other societies. In some countries, there is only one society. And that society sometimes will only collect for performance income, but some countries, that society will also collect for mechanical income. And some countries have one society that collects performance, mechanical, and other types like synchronization. So everything I said is US and more generic. So if you're not a US resident, or if you're with an international or out of US PRO, some of this is going to be a little bit different for you, but all PROs in most countries have sister sort of relationships or affiliations with ASCAP, CSAC, or BMI. So if you have options in your country, one of your big questions is, which is your sister agency in the US? Because from an economic standpoint and a chart standpoint, we already know what's first world economically, but we also know what's first world musically. And stuff tends to blow up, you know, in the US. Like there's certain parts of the world where we know money's being made, right? And it tends to be first world countries. But like Brazil, there's a lot of money in music in Brazil. Argentina, a lot of money. South Africa, a lot of money. So if you're there, you would want to know who your sister PRO is here to make sure you're affiliating with the right one. So I'm gonna shut it down for the sake of time and questions, but I hope I didn't just like spray you with the fire hose.
I think the spray was very, very much appreciated. Lots of useful stuff in there. Guys, who has questions? I mean, I'm sure everybody has some kind of question. What's the best way to do this here? I would say maybe put them in the chat or raise your hand. Cyrus, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah. Hi, Brock. Well, thank you so much for all the information. It was really, really useful. I was wondering, once you sign up, let's say I go into ASCAP and I create an account and I sign up, I pay these fees. Is there like an ID that they give you that let's say that I go into kind of the scenario you were putting, a collaboration with someone. Are they supposed to ask for that, or who would be the person that manages where every writer that's involved in that project is gonna, you know what I mean? Like everyone chips in with their own PRO. How do you do that part?
Cyrus, that's a great question. And it's also a complicated question, because when you register with the PRO, and I'll talk a little bit faster just because it's for the sake of time, you get issued a number that's specific to you as a writer. If you register as a publisher, you'll get issued another number. I think it's an IPI, and sorry, because I'm not an administrator, so sometimes I forget which term is which, but I think it's an IPI number for writers. If somebody confirms that in the chat, that'd be awesome if you already know the answer. But I think it's an IPI number. That's for, but either way, there's a number specific to you as a writer. There's a number specific to you as a publisher. And then there's a number specific to each musical composition in all of the repertoires that are in each PRO. So when you collaborate, that's one piece of the puzzle. Now you know your numbers. Just go into your account. What's my IPN number? What's the song number, right? When you collaborate, here's the tricky part. Let's say you and Alex write a song together. What if you're thinking Alex is going to register it? What if he's thinking you're going to register it? And what if neither of you do? That happens all the time. What if you try to register it and Alex also tries to register it? What are you going to do? That happens all the time. So you can imagine the PROs have a lot of cleanup work and a lot of like missed entries and misinformation in their database. So in my mind, this is more about, that has to be part of the collaboration. Who's going to register this with the PROs, and can we confirm it's accurate once it's done? Because if Alex puts in all the information, including yours, you still have your account. So if yours is input incorrectly, you'll still have the opportunity to correct it. But what you don't want is double entries, because double entries means misinformation, miscalculations, and mispayments. So work together in your collaboration. Who's going to take charge on this? Who's going to input it? And sometimes everybody says, well, I'll just do my own. So then you put in your 30% of a song in ASCAP. That could also get tricky. But either way, and one last piece on collaborations, because sometimes you'll collaborate with people that, like, let's say there's 4 writers. One of them has their exclusive songwriter to a major publisher. One of them has their own publishing company, and then the other 2 are like self-published. So maybe we only need 3 writers. But my point is like, then that's tricky too, because anyone that's signed to a major, I guarantee you that major is going to want to take responsibility, because they want to make sure you don't screw it up, right? So they're going to jump in and say, don't, like, we got this, but it's not like a friendly, we got this. They're like, don't even think about touching this. But if everybody's sort of indie or self-published, that's where you're going to have to just like, hey, who's responsible? And then let's double check our work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think, was it Key? Do you have a question? Or Key, I think he put it in the chat. He says, they say, do I need to sign up on Harry Fox if I signed up on Song Trust?
So you can't, so here's where you need to think about, and I would, to answer that, I'd just have to look at the license language when you sign up, because some of these are exclusive, some are non-exclusive. Some, you're just having two services perform the same function, which will ultimately mean you're not going to get paid because there's just going to be confusing records. So I don't know, I can look at that later and I can email Alex like, hey, here's an answer to that one question. But generally speaking, when you think about PROs, you have to be exclusive on pretty much everything else, unless it says it's an exclusive deal. You're risking just your information being out there multiple times, which means it's just not going to get calculated correctly. So understand, does Song Trust require like exclusive relationship? Then you might be violating it by registering with Harry Fox or vice versa. But it's not just about violating the contract. It's also about they're doing this, they're performing the same function. They're going to step on each other's toes if they're doing their job. And if they're not stepping on each other's toes, that means they're not doing the job.
Thank you. Mike had a question in there.
Does that mean I should self-publish or the writer split just be ignored? Oh, so when you release on record label, so the question is, I've released music on record labels. Does that mean I should self-publish? Should the writer split just be agreed on splits during negotiation? A record deal, in the most technical respect, is a deal for you to perform as an artist and record. So you'll get compensated according to that. If your record deal is with an indie record label and they say, hey, also part of this is like a songwriting, because I've seen everything, right? So there's like a 2-page contract and it's a record deal, but also a songwriting deal. And sometimes those just, that's the way this industry works, right? So the answer to the question is, should you self-publish? I don't know that you have an option, right? I mean, if they didn't offer you a publishing deal, then it sounds like you have no choice, because self-publishing, just so we're clear, means no one else is publishing for you. It's like self-eating breakfast. You know what I mean? Like self-making my own breakfast. And I'm not, again, I'm trying to be funny without being funny. You have to look at this as like, who else is responsible? Like when I'm a self-publisher, sometimes people will throw that around as like a merit badge, when the reality is, it's great if you're intentionally self-publishing, but that means you're a business. If you're self-publishing by default because you don't have a publishing deal, but you're not operating this like a true economic business, then no one's taking care of business. And so your writer splits and like agreed upon splits. My question to you, Michael, is, well, why would you be agreeing to writer splits on a record deal? Because that means your record deal is telling you who's writing what and what the splits are. So to me, I wouldn't be agreeing to anything about me as a songwriter if I'm signing a record deal, right? I think that's probably the best answer.
It's that difference between the publishing and the songwriting, right? Publishing
is the activity of caring for and administering the rights and collecting on the income related to the song. Writing it is the creation of it, right? So they're two different activities, but songwriting and publishing go hand in hand. They're complementary businesses, right?
Looks like Karen had a question. She says, do I need to register copyrights with Library of Congress for every song I've written before joining a pro?
Okay, you do not, in terms of like technical, like chronology. You just have to think about it pragmatically. So in the United States, a lot of people will say, oh, you don't even have to register music. And the reason why that's true, but not the best advice, is because in copyright in the US, as soon as you fix a work in a tangible medium of expression, like a CD, or you write it, or you type it and then print it out, or to save it on a hard drive for that matter, copyright protects it. But you can't use copyright to protect you without a registration. You can't sue anybody. So there's a lot of reasons why pragmatically you want to register. When you register is also a tricky question, because really you don't want to register. Well, you can, I want to be careful because I'm a lawyer and some of this could be misconstrued, but you could register before publication. You could register after publication. There's a part of me that recommends like registering at the point it's published, which might be the first gig. It might be the first time you release it on social media. It might be the first time it's on YouTube or whatever. But because there's different protections and mechanisms for unpublished works or pre-published works than there are for published works. So whether it comes before or after the PRO is less relevant. It's really about the publication is like, do you register it pre-publication? And my vote is register it the moment that you publish it. And if you're a few days late, keep in mind, when you register within the first 3 months, your protection is basically effective as of the date of first publication. But after 3 months, you're basically registering when you're registering. So if an infringement case accrues before that time, you're not registered. You don't have the same rights until you're registered. So just factor that in.
Looks like David has a question there. David, music scene.
So like live music, what's different? So if I'm just trying to read this quickly. So if the question is, are there special rules for live improvised? Meaning I get up there with a set list of 5 songs for my set, but while I'm playing, I just like, forget it. I kick my notes off the stage and I just start performing my favorites that weren't on the set, or maybe I do some medleys, or maybe just improvise and just make up whatever I want. If the venue, think about it, the venue is licensed for the public performance of songs that are in the repertoires that are licensing. So if it's an ASCAP song and there's however many million songs in ASCAP, I don't care if you play one of them or 100 of them, or you switch up your set list 50 times, as long as they're all in that repertoire, that one license covers the whole thing. So when you say improvise, I'm guessing you mean like if you change up your set list, or maybe, but if you mean by improvise, if you mean like actually like alter the songs, like more of like derivative work, like, hey, what if because I speak Portuguese, I could just like on the fly translate to Portuguese and sing the song in Portuguese.
Yeah, a lot of jazz musicians will play completely improvisational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, when you're talking about jazz, so a lot of times when they're completely they're doing that, they're making the music up. It's original as it's being played. So now the license doesn't matter, because obviously that, like in a jazz set, that's a perfect example. I'm glad you brought that up, David. When it's new and original, now it's just being sent, now it's distributed, it's published for the first time. And so now it becomes a different issue. It's not about whether the venue had a license, it's about now the cat's out of the bag. If I created that, how do I go back and capture that? So if you're that jazz artist or band or whatever, somebody is going to need to capture that and go register the copyright and register the songs. But you have a whole new dilemma, which is who owns what, right? There's 10 people on the stage and the drummer saying, well, I think I created the beat. And like, the dilemma there with having multiple people kind of improvise on the set, right? But those are the real issues, is like, who's going to own this? So it's almost like the songwriting room becomes the stage in that moment. So the second you get off, if you're one of those collaborators, you better like have a talk like, hey guys, let's figure out who owns what here.
I just threw a question in the chat, and if anybody else has some more, I'm happy to go a little bit past the hour. I know we're kind of at that point, but Brock, you had some good points about some perks that come with like ASCAP, like those airlines and the rental cars. Like, is that something that anybody can tap into, or how does that work?
Yeah. So in fact, while you're kind of shopping between them, just go on the website and look at, there's I think a drop down or a link on both ASCAP and BMI, like benefits of membership. And it'll tell you like Hertz rentals 15% off, or Hilton hotels. I'm making those up, but whatever they are, they'll tell you there. But I will say, because I'm an ASCAP writer, I get emails from ASCAP pretty frequently that are educational, like really good webinars and YouTube stuff to watch, stuff to read. But I also get invited to like, a lot of it's just baloney, like waste of time stuff. But there is some good stuff buried in there of collaboration opportunities, and like, hey, we're having a songwriter retreat. And, yeah, it might be expensive, but to me, that might be worth it. Or maybe it, it's where I'm going to be on vacation or whatever, but you can find out on the website. That's the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll have to cut out in like about 3 minutes. Sorry. But if I could probably answer another question or two.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything else? A lot of good stuff here.
If I missed a question in the chat, maybe just say your name in the chat and I'll scroll back up for it.
And I will be sending out this recording as well to everybody that dropped their email. So if you would still like it, feel free to drop your email in the chat. Brock also has a Google Doc with a list of his talking points that I'll include in what I send you, just to kind of help, because there's so many cool moving pieces here. I want to make sure we capture it all. So anyone else, last chance to chime in?
Yeah, I just had a real short one. If I already released the song, I know you mentioned about the 3 months and everything, but if this song was released a couple of years back, and I haven't registered because I just moved to the US, can I still bring that as I create my account with, let's say, ASCAP or any of these? Do I just create the account first and then register it?
Yeah. So even if you've been doing this for 20 years and this was the wake up call that you needed, you can literally register everything right now. It's just like with the PROs, they will only go back so far once they get in their system. And part of it is a legal statute of limitations. Like, excuse me, you can't sue them after a certain period of time, even if they didn't pay you. So they're just not going to care. Like if you're like, hey, I have 20 years worth of reporting, they're just not going to care. They're going to care about the last 4 years, basically. But it's still worth doing it. And on the copyright side, let me give one other practice tip for you. When you register, a lot of people, because now it used to be done on paper, and in some ways that was way more difficult, but it actually clarified things a little bit more. The digital experience on the US Copyright Office is horrible. I stopped doing copyright registrations because it's such an absolute horrific waste of time, but you still have to do it. So when you do it, if you're going to register your works, you can register sound recording and underlying musical composition on one application if you're the owner, or if it's the same owners. And that could be more than one song, more than one track. So let's say you have literally like 25 songs that you wrote and recorded, and you're the owner of both. Register all 25 together. But let's say of those 25, 3 were collaborations with Alex. Register those 3 separately with you and Alex listed, and then register the other ones all in one application. Because I had somebody the other day, they're like, oh man, I just spent whatever, $800 in applications. And I'm like, why? And they never told me who was what, and they registered every single thing separately. So it's just something to factor in.
Thank you, Brock. Brock, where can people connect with you? I mean, or where can they learn more about you and maybe follow you somewhere?
I think the place where if I am active, it's Instagram at Brock Shinen, just my full name. I have a YouTube channel called Indie Music Success. Right now it's weekly. I'll at least do a season of content there. But otherwise, I think Instagram and if anybody needs to reach me, that's probably the easiest way to just kind of track my movement.
Right on. Well, thank you so much, Brock. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I did put a link in the chat to the Mixer event we'll have on March 1st. Great chance to come out and meet some more folks from the industry. And like I mentioned, I will email out the video and the notes from this presentation. So hopefully you guys can tap back into that. And Brock, thank you so much for being here. I think it's been super useful and super helpful to everyone. Me for sure.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate being able to help. So wish you luck.
Right on. Thank you, guys. Good night, everyone.
All right, guys. Good night.